Good evening and welcome to the planning meeting. It is now 6 p.m. and I would like to start this meeting. I am Councillor Cherry and I will be the chair of this meeting. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded for publication on the Council's website. There are no planned fire alarms this evening. In the case of an emergency, please evacuate the building using the nearest available exit and congregate at the assembly point outside the college. And if I can also remind people to make sure their phones are on silent. Thank you. Item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence. I have one apology from Councillor Bill Mumford. Carly, have there been any other apologies received?
No further apologies.
Item 2 on the agenda. I move that the minutes of the Planning Committee meeting held on the 14th of April 2026 be approved as a correct record. Now, the only two people who were present at the last meeting was myself and Councillor Taylor. So I propose the minutes as being correct.
And I'd second that.
Thank you. I move that the minutes of the Planning Committee are correct. Item 3 on the agenda is items of urgent business. I have not agreed to any urgent items. Item 4 on the agenda, declarations of interest. Does anyone have declarations of interest to make? There are no declarations that have been raised. Item 5 on the agenda, declarations of receipts of correspondence and/or any meetings, discussions held relevant to determination of any planning, application or enforcement action to be resolved at this meeting. I've received email communications from Michael Thompson, Neil Spate and Mark Wharton. I presume some others have received those emails also. Thank you. Are there any other contacts regards item agenda 5? Okay. Item 6 on the agenda is planning appeals.
Sorry, Chair. Item 260005 HHA, and I've had a letter which I think now everybody's got from the person who's put the application in, but the letters come in late. But I think everybody else has seen that. I'd like to think so, from Mr. Bancol. Is that true?
Yeah, that's it. Yes, we had a letter from Mr. Bancol regards the item that relates to 1 Ball Close. Can I ask that Jonathan King present, please, the planning appeals? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The report on the appeals is set out at pages 19 to 25. There's a variety of appeals that were considered by the Planning Inspectorate over that time, and the outturns, as you can see on page 25, of a total of 6, only 2 were allowed, so that's a total of 33%, which is a sort of reasonable sort of outcome in terms of allowed as opposed to dismissed.
Thank you, Jonathan. Now this brings us to item 7 on tonight's planning. It's 25-00845-out. It's the land adjacent to St Clair's School, Railway Line and Butts Lane, SLH, in Stanford-le-Hope. Can I ask David Stewart to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, an item of housekeeping. Since the reports were published, there has been 2 further letters of representation received. One objecting to the scheme, on the same grounds as the other objectors have identified and which are in the original report that went to the 10th of March Planning Committee, and one letter of support for the scheme, basically outlining the benefits to the adjoining school. So, members, this application was deferred from March the 10th Planning Committee to allow officers to revert to Sport England and ascertain if their technical objection to the proposal could be resolved. This is because there is a small amount of playing field that would be lost. I will show you on plans in due course. However, I think it's really important to actually go back to the very beginning and outline the nature of the application that has to be determined this evening. And if I can get control of the screen. Thank you. I can't move the screen presentation. Thank you. Sorry for that slight interruption, but technology intervenes. Okay, so the application site, which is on the screen in front of you, it's outlined in red. There are one or two things to notice. The first is that the application does not cover the whole of the land stretching between St Clair's School and Mucking Wharf Road. It also doesn't stretch as far to the west as the edge of the highway on Butts Lane. There is a strip of land that intervenes which is not part of this application. You'll also see in the northern part of the site, where my cursor is, a section of land that is part of the St Clair's School. And that's the strip of land that I'll be referring to further in due course. There's an aerial shot of the same thing, but more importantly, here is a screen slide showing the location of the site, which is, has a red circle within it, relative to the built-up area of Stanfordley Hope. Now, the application that's before you is in outline. I'll explain what that is in just a moment. But it's for the erection of up to 121 dwellings, together with landscaping and means of access. Now, it's in outline because what you are being asked to approve or determine is the use of the land for residential purposes and a number of parameters that will guide future development. The only thing that has to be determined this evening, if you were minded to grant approval, is for the means of access into the site. And the slide that's showing shows a T-junction which meets Butts Lane. You will see that there is an indicative layout for the road which is coloured grey. That's not for determination this evening. It's basically the junction on Butts Lane, which will provide access into the main residential part of the proposal. Now, the application is accompanied by a number of parameters, and if approved, conditions will be attached to any planning permission that would ensure that any future reserved matters, such as detailed design, appearance, and details of layout, will conform to the parameters that are on display this evening. So as you can see, from gaining access into the school land, there is a further access partway along which crosses the existing footpath at the northern end of the site into the main residential part of the development, which relates to the triangular piece of land that is a different colour to the rest of the site. You'll see, firstly, that it doesn't cover the whole of the site. Land in the southern part of the site is predominantly laid to landscaping. Now, part of that extensive landscape area will be required to satisfy surface water drainage in the form of a sustainable urban drainage system. It will be required to provide amenity for future residents. It will be required to provide things, typical amenities such as dog walking routes, and there is a route around the whole site that's approximately 2.3 kilometres in length. That is to ensure that pressure is taken off other areas close by that might otherwise be used for dog walking. You will see that there is no other means of access into the site apart from the very northern end. There's no pedestrian access into either the remainder of the field or onto Butts Lane. There is simply no facility for that. One of the reasons why there is a strip of land between the proposed site and the Butts Lane Highway is that it's in private ownership and does not form part of the scheme at all. The applicants have also provided an illustrative layout. This shows a mix of terrace, semi-detached and detached properties, most of which will be either 2 or 2.5 stories. 2.5 stories means rooms in the roof. One particular block, the 2 blocks where my cursor is, are shown to be 3 stories in height, but all the remaining development will be of a reasonably traditional domestic scale. Now, the illustrative layout can be changed, but generally the principles governing the way in which there is movement through the site, both pedestrian and vehicular, and the general form, development form, will have to adhere to all the parameters set out. Now, the particular issue on which this application was deferred at the March Committee relates to the use of a piece of school site. And here is the strip of land that is affected, and you'll see it on the left-hand part of the diagram relative to the current layout of sports pitches at the school. The right-hand layout shows a revised layout with the 2 football pitches affected moved further northwards. This was simply to demonstrate that there was no loss of pitch provision arising from this proposal. Now, I'll go on to talk about the Sport England objection much later. But I think it's probably time for me to set out the main considerations that need to be taken into account. Much of what I say is covered in more detail in the original report, and you've no doubt been able to look at that before this evening's meeting. The first important point is that the current government, under the National Planning Policy Framework, place great emphasis on the need to boost the supply of housing throughout the country. And it's no different for Thurrock. In fact, the NPPF requires Thurrock to provide a 5-year housing land supply. Current estimates are that we are only able to provide in the order of 1 year. So there is a very significant shortfall. The same policy, of course, applies to the provision of affordable housing. And again, over the past few years, Thurrock has been unable to meet the need arising for affordable accommodation. In fact, the difference is quite significant. The need is in the order of about 450 affordable dwellings per year, and the actual provision for the last recorded years in 2021-22 was 19, and in 2022-3 was 9. That situation hasn't greatly changed, but there are no figures that have been published to cover those years. It's true to say that in more recent times, the Council has granted permission for a number of housing schemes. Most are in outline and most are on very large sites. They're estimated to provide about a further 0.75 or 1 year's supply of housing land that will contribute to your 5-year supply. This is because it takes an awful long time for outline planning applications to obtain their legal agreements for contributions to the local authority to cover various matters, and then to submit reserved matters applications. Many are also promoted by land promoters, so they have to, once they get permission, have to sell the site to a housing developer, and that too takes time, as anybody who's sold a house knows. But the long and the short of it is that even taking those planning permissions and resolutions to grant planning permission into account, there's still between 3.5 years and 4 years shortfall in housing land supply over the 5-year period. Now, because of that, the NPPF at paragraph 11 establishes what's called a tilted balance, but it's effectively where policies and plans are out of date, there is a presumption in favour of schemes that provide housing, and that's a starting point for a consideration of this application. Other key factors to take into account relate to sustainability and the sustainability of the location. The site is well located relative to local facilities in the urban area. There are good bus services serving the site or close by the site, which give access to nearby towns. There's good connection for both pedestrians and cyclists to Stanford. So the site is sustainable in terms of its locational attributes. Now, set against these factors which are in favour of the proposal is the fact that the land is situated in the Greenbelt. And I think nearly everybody recognises that historically, designation of land as Greenbelt has served to protect land from development. And indeed, that's one of the key features of greenbelt protection. However, more recently, at the end of 2024, policies towards development in the greenbelt have changed, and changed significantly. National policy now states that development in the greenbelt does not need to be inappropriate if the site is considered to be grey belt. Now, it doesn't alter the status of the fact that the site's undeveloped. You can have an undeveloped greenfield site that can be classified grey belt, and I'll explain how in just a second. The NPPF does give a definition of what grey belt land is. It's defined as land that doesn't make a strong contribution in either checking the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas, doesn't make a strong contribution to towns merging, and doesn't provide a strong contribution to the setting of a historic town. So when you consider these three factors, the following is the conclusion of officers. On the first matter, on preventing urban sprawl, we also have to take into consideration planning policy guidance. Now, planning policy guidance gives further advice that sites which are adjacent to urban areas and have physical features that contain development will make a moderate contribution to urban sprawl. This is quite important thing to consider. So in relation to this particular site, it is adjacent to the urban area. It abuts St Clair's School, which is part of the settlement. On its eastern side, there is a very strong physical boundary to the spread of development provided by the railway. That is a very strong piece of infrastructure that will help to contain development on this site. Land to the south, beyond Mucking Wharf Road, is actually designated a wildlife site and is protected for that reason. So development could not spread much further south. In fact, it couldn't spread further south in terms of physical form, because there is, as you know, there are high tension pylons crossing the site, the southern part of the site, and there's a high pressure gas pipeline. On the western side, of course, there's Butts Lane, but I need to refer to the development that was approved on the opposite side of Butts Lane, Maple Park. And if I just flick back to this slide, you'll see where my cursor is, a development of housing since probably 2015. Which is called Maple Park, a development of around 190 odd dwellings that was approved as part of a call-in application, so the Secretary of State approved this. Land immediately to the south of Maple Park formed an essential landscape barrier and amenity area to serve that estate. So that part of the site could not be developed either. So in terms of preventing urban sprawl, this site does conform to the definition of making a moderate contribution to preventing urban sprawl. That's really important because it doesn't carry weight. The NPPF requires the site to make a strong contribution. I know it's wording, but nevertheless, it's a very important wording to consider. I'll now move on to the other criteria that I mentioned before. The next one is the merging of towns. Clearly, development of this site will not cause towns to merge. The nearest settlements are Southfields, some distance away to the northwest, and Chadwell St Mary. There is extensive intervening land, so there's no chance of, by approving this development, that you will be causing the merging of towns. And on the final point, the protection of the setting of a historic town, Stanford-le-Hope is not a historic town, so it doesn't serve a purpose in protecting the setting. So it's clear that the land does fall within the definition of what's termed grey belt. Now that doesn't, in itself, doesn't mean that you can develop it, because the NPPF goes on to state that at paragraph 155, it must meet 4 criteria. And I'll go through each of those criteria in turn. The first test is whether the development would undermine the purposes of the remaining green belt across the plan area as a whole. Now, with respect to this site, there is still extensive land falling within the green belt that lie between the application site and other settlements. So it doesn't undermine the purposes of the remaining green belt, and therefore it complies with criterion A. The second test provided by the paragraph requires there to be a need for the development. Now, I've briefly touched on housing land supply and the severe shortfall that this borough has. So there is a need for the development proposed. So it meets that criteria. The third criteria is that the site should be in the presentation. It's close to nearby bus routes. It has good cycling links. It has good pedestrian links with the existing urban area and other towns in the borough. The final test is whether this specified in the NPPF, and they are, firstly, that affordable housing must be provided at least 15% above current policy requirements. Now, the current policy requirements for the provision require major developments to provide 35% of all housing to be affordable. This scheme will provide 50%, so it is 15% above existing policy requirements. The next test of the golden rules is that the scheme must make necessary improvements to national and local infrastructure. Now, I stress the word necessary. In this case, the development does not give rise to the need to improve national infrastructure, the most typical of which might be improvement to trunk routes. You'll probably come across this in other applications that come before you in the future. In terms of local infrastructure requirements, there are some infrastructure requirements that this development must meet beyond normal planning considerations, and those are it must provide educational places. Now, with respect to educational provision, this takes the form of a financial contribution to allow the local education authority to provide places within nearby local schools. In terms of secondary education, there is a similar requirement. However, in this particular case, there is sufficient spare capacity, both now and forecast up to 2029, in nearby local schools, the Mossbourne Academies, in other words, for those who know the area, to accommodate sufficient school places to cater for this development. The final element in relation to education is that special provision needs to be made for SEN children, and that is also in the form of contribution, but will go to local schools because SEN education is provided in mainstream schools. The final requirement of the Golden Rules is that new green spaces or improvements to existing green spaces must be provided. And in this respect, one has to go back to the parameters plan, where this scheme identifies at least 50% of the site will form part of landscaping proposals and amenity proposals that can be used both by future residents of this scheme, but also by nearby existing local residents. It's for these reasons that the Golden Rules are met. And that means development of this site for housing purposes is not inappropriate in the Greenbelt. Now, of course, a number of other material factors are laid out in the main report, the original report that went to Planning Committee, relating to things like climate change, residential amenity, etc., that also have to be taken into account. But the reason it was deferred was specifically relating to the sports provision, and in particular to the Sport England objection. Now, as I've previously said, the development requires a strip of land, small strip of land, that is technically part of the school's playing field. It's a grassed area on the south side of the sports field, and the land clips the southern edge of existing pitches, which, as I said, can be repositioned within the existing school premises and land ownership to allow continued use, so that no loss of sports provision will occur. Sport England have been recontacted since the original committee. They have reaffirmed that the school will not lose any sports pitches. However, part of their main remit and part of their key policies requires them to object if there is a loss of any school playing field land. There are exceptions, and those two exceptions as they apply to this site are either that the land is replaced with other land coming into school playing field use, or that there are improvements to sports facilities on the reduced area. Now, the developer has had extensive negotiations with Sport England. They have shown that the number of pitches is not adversely impacted. That's important because local policy in the Thurrock core strategy requires there to be no loss of sports facilities. So the fact that there aren't any loss of pitches arising from this proposal accords with your local sports provision policy. We have asked the school to confirm what they intend to do with monies raised from the sale of the land. Now, the report, and the original report in particular, goes into some detail regarding the concrete cancer problems that the school faces. In fact, it requires almost a total redevelopment of the school premises to actually mitigate and resolve the problem. And in fact, I believe that there is a public consultation on proposals for redevelopment of the school in 2 days' time to be held at the school. And I believe that various people have been invited, including ward councillors. At this stage, the Department for Education has agreed in principle to fund the school project. It's agreed in principle, but of course it all comes down to the fine detail and the final scheme. I have been presented very recently with what the architects hope to be the final scheme, which may come in as a planning application in mid-July for your consideration at a future committee. However, until that time, the final budget can't be set. The build programme is likely to last up to 4 years, and the school really want to hasten the build programme, and they want to adapt certain facilities to suit their curricular needs. And so they are very reluctant to commit funds to other purposes at this stage. But what they have said is that if there is sufficient funds available, yes, they will be removing all the temporary accommodation that's currently at the school and reinstate the pitch that was lost, so there will be one additional football pitch. But they'd also like to provide a further 3G artificial pitch. Unfortunately, that's not a commitment, so it can't be taken into account as an improvement, and thereby Sport England remove their objection. But that is the current situation. So, I think I've spoken long enough, but I'll very briefly recap the conclusions. There is a presumption in favour of the scheme afforded by the MPPF. This grey belt proposal is not an inappropriate form of development. The scheme meets the test set by paragraph 155 of the MPPF. And indeed, I should point out that those schemes that meet the golden rules are required by the MPPF to be given significant weight in favour of granting planning permission. The site is a sustainable one. It'll deliver much needed housing in the borough. And I should point out that the site was included in the Regulation 18 draft local plan some 2 or 3 years ago as a site suitable for further residential development. Set against that, we've run through the arguments about the green belt. It is best and most versatile agricultural land, but the MPPF states that you have to have regard to the best and most versatile land, which differs slightly from the wording of the policy. And as the MPPF is a more recent document, and as our Thurrock core strategy is really out of date, more weight has to be given to the MPPF definition. And really, it's for those reasons that I repeat the recommendation given to the original committee that planning permission should be granted subject to a Section 106 agreement and the imposition of suitable conditions. So if there are any questions, I'd be very happy to try and answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for your very detailed report there. Do we have a speaker regards the application? Neil Spade, would you like to come forward? You'll have 3 minutes to speak on this subject, Neil. We're just going to get the timer ready to go, but if you'd like to lead on, thank you.
Yeah, first and foremost, what I would like to say is thank you to the members of the Planning Committee that have stepped forward for what is an arduous task. You are going to face sleepless nights, countless headaches, and you're going to get very few thanks for it. So thank you for stepping up. It is very difficult. As you've just heard from the complexity of Mr. Stewart, there are an awful lot of things and phrases like NPPF and whatever that you're going to learn a lot about. Anyway, to get to the matter in hand, I've got 3 minutes to counter, I think it was about 30 minutes then, of Mr. Stewart putting forward some information and giving you some shots on the screen. It's going to be very difficult to do that, but I'll try my best. The first thing I must point out is I fundamentally disagree with the interpretation of the Golden Rules and the NPPF 2024, but it's too detailed for me to go through it individually. But I think there's a lot of opinion that you've just heard. I would disagree with a lot of the facts. And one of the facts that I do disagree with is you had a plan put before you that showed the current situation in terms of the layout of the pitches, which we've just talked about, which are really important regarding Sports England. And then here's a picture of a proposed layout of the pitches. And somehow, and quite by magic, three rather large temporary buildings that will be there for the next couple of years at least have disappeared. If you pass this planning application, they'll come back with you give them the outline, they'll come back with a detailed application, and they'll have started work long before those buildings are reduced. And I just find it absolutely ridiculous that you're being misinformed to that extent. Anyway, further to my comments to the previous incarnation of this committee when this application was considered, I refer members to the number of objections to the site that were accepted. They particularly include the danger that will be caused by creating a new junction on a very busy and narrow rural road just yards from an existing roundabout that serves St Clair's School and the Stamford Park estate. It's not Maple Park, it's Stamford Park. The site is currently designated Greenbelt, and its loss would be another step towards what is often described as urban sprawl, though I recognise planning officers have difficulty in recognising that term. The proposal, despite what you've been told, lacks any readily useful Section 106 contribution. There is no significant addition to local infrastructure. However, its creation as a housing estate will add to the current degradation of local services. The influx of new residents will negatively impact local health and education offers. And as I've just mentioned to you, the site will mean a significant loss of school playing fields at St Clair's, as is evidenced in the new report from Sports England. We're only here today because of that report from Sports England, and they stood by their statement. And you've been told that there's not been a loss of sports facilities. Well, cricket teams from Horndon and St Clair's youth football teams have already been moved on from the site, so that's not true either. Reducing the site further will have a big impact on the ability of the playing fields to be used by students and the local community. As you've heard, the Osborne Trust has acknowledged it will no longer be able to fund further improvements to existing facilities, hence we have a net loss. And the major rebuilding project that Mr. Stewart mentioned to you is going to take a number of years. It is a significant thing. They're going to rebuild the whole secondary school. Those of you that know it know what the size of it is. And if you think that's not going to have an impact at the same time as you have a housing estate, then I just don't know why you're there. I run out of time. If you'd like to ask me some questions, I'd be more than happy to give you some information, but that's down to your good selves. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you for your report. Do any of the members have any questions for Neil Spate?
I think he made his point very, very clear.
Hey, Neil. Could you could you comment a bit more on the Sports England report and how it seems that that hasn't been considered in terms of the teams moving away? So if the teams have been moved away because there's going to be less playing fields, but yet the report states there is no loss of playing fields, could you explain that just a bit more from your position?
Yeah, I mean, there's a historic element to this. When the new temporary buildings, which you've seen them, are really impressive, actually. They're far from temporary, and I can assure you that there is, as an ex-governor at St Clair's School and as someone very close to members of the Osborne Trust, there's a very real possibility that they may well come back and say, I'll tell you what, we've got these really great classrooms that work really, really well. We've got a shortfall of classroom opportunities. We've got a shortfall of pupil places. It would make an awful lot of sense to keep these buildings. So I wouldn't rule out that coming there in the future. So I think, you know, you've got to play to that. But in terms of the actual sports pitches, as I say, Horndon Cricket Club used to play there. There were 2 cricket squares. One was removed. Horndon have had to move somewhere else, which is a loss of an amenity for people in the town and the village of Horndon. And St Clair's football team, youth football team, which is not connected with the school even though they share a name, some of their pitches, kids have had to move to pitches elsewhere in the borough because there just simply were not enough pitches once the temporary buildings were played and there was an alignment of, you know, they had to make a decision. Do we have small-sided pitches? Do we have big pitches? And so there was a compromise reached, so we've lost it. You had the drawing showing the new road and access. Well, I went down and took a film there the other day, and it's going to wipe out at least 10 yards at the top. So those pitches are going to be made even smaller. And as I say, the elephant in the room is the plan that you were just shown shows that the temporary buildings had been removed. Well, there is no, I don't think, cat in hell's chance that those buildings are going to be removed until the very least the whole school is rebuilt. So we're talking a number of years. And I just think it's really injudicious for this council to suggest that that is so. And if you read in detail the response from Sports England, they clearly come back and say, we do not support this. We stand by our original, that there is a denudation of the sporting facilities on this site. There's a statement that talks about an artificial pitch, which would in some ways solve the problem, but the school equally have come forward. Again, to be fair, Mr. Stewart's mentioned it. They've come forward and said, our priority now is funding the rebuild. And where we were considering using some of the money we got from the sale of that strip of land to maybe putting towards an artificial pitch or whatever, we certainly can't consider that now. So there are no viable plans to improve the existing sporting facilities. And the whole reason that you are here this evening, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact that your predecessor as a committee listened to all the stuff that you've just heard from Mr. Stewart. They debated it, they discussed it, they dissected it, and they rejected it all. And they actually cast a vote rejecting the whole application and then came under some pressure to reconsider on the basis of, well, are we sure that Sport England have said what they said? And so it was almost unprecedented. The committee members, and Councillor Cherry was one of them, and Councillor Taylor was there at that meeting. They had a chat and they said, okay, just for clarity, to be absolutely sure that rejection is the right decision, let's go back to Sport England. And so they changed their mind. They went back to Sport England, and you have the answer from Sport England in front of you. We stand by our objection to this scheme. So I think if you just balance everything in the round, you really have no alternative but to reject this application. And you're very inexperienced, and as I said, and I do think, admire you for standing forward. I wouldn't want you to be predetermined, but I've taken the liberty of drafting some words, because if you reject this, you will be asked to put forward another recommendation. It would be improper for me to say what that would be now, but for guidance, were you to ask for it, Carly has a copy of what I suggest might be the basis of what you would put forward.
Thank you, Neil. Any more questions from the committee? I've one question for you yourself, Neil. The road, the junction you describe as being very dangerous. Can you tell us what the speed limit of that road is at the moment?
Yeah, it's at the moment, there's a small iron fence as a footpath turns round and goes onto the footpath that goes down towards Mucking Trust, fields and where the nature reserve is and whatever. Very used local footpath. It's quite narrow. It's surrounded by hedgerow. It's on the crest of an upturn of a hill and on the edge of a bend.
Sorry, no, I asked you if you know what the speed limit is of the road.
Oh, the speed limit is 30. It will be a statutory 30 mile an hour. At that point, earlier it was 20, and I'm not quite sure where. Sorry, the 20 is not a statutory limit. It's a recommendation around schools, so it will be a 30 mile an hour limit. But vision is not great. And as I say, you literally. I took a film the other day. It was strange. A car went round the corner at speed, realised it was a roundabout, and slowed down quite quickly. And just think you're sticking a T-junction there with an awful lot of houses and traffic going in and out of it. And I did think we passed over the impact of that junction rather quickly in the presentation, but there you go. I think it's dangerous, Councillor Cherry, and everybody that I've spoken to that uses that road thinks that it's dangerous. And if you remember, this committee, in a former thing, knocked back the plans for the quarry on the grounds that was a very narrow rural road and it was dangerous. The road hasn't changed, it's still dangerous.
So another question in relation to that. The 20 mile an hour limit extended to that junction and beyond, would that take away any of the danger that you're anticipating?
It possibly would if people abided by it, but I can assure you, as someone who goes up and down Butts Lane a great deal, and if you spoke to the residents of Butts Lane, not an awful lot of people. You get an awful lot of mums and dads rushing to get their kids into school at peak times. When it's not peak times, you get an awful lot of people using Butts Lane and Muckingford Lane to get from East Tilbury through to the other side, and it comes at high. It is. I mean, there have been a couple of fairly big accidents on that road, and I remember one a couple of years ago where a young man flipped his car and lost an arm.
Thank you. Any more questions of Mr. Spate? Councillor Davis.
You said there's only one access onto this development if it's developed. Is that good? Is there an emergency exit?
Well, the plan was there in front of you, as Mr. Stewart said. You go down the new road that's going to be created, and then you would turn, if you're going in, you would turn right into the new building. But everything going in and out is going to come out onto Butts Lane at that very dangerous point.
Yes, there's only one access.
Thank you. Have you got any questions for the Planning Officer, David Stewart?
Hi, Mr. Stewart. Quick question. On the plans that you showed with the fields, how come the temporary buildings weren't part of that plan you showed, as Neil Spite seemed to suggest?
Neil was absolutely right that the second plan showed the buildings removed. That was to show you that an additional sports pitch was to be provided. And when I say additional, it was the sports pitch that was lost when the temporary buildings were put on there. Because of the rack problem, the government rushed through emergency legislation to allow temporary buildings to be placed in schools without the need for planning permission, and that's where the buildings went, basically. Just a point of clarification on how it affects the existing 2 football pitches to the west of what I call the artificial pitch. It doesn't. They are still there if that piece of land was lost to the residential development. What has happened is that they're shifted north marginally, because actually virtually the whole of the sports pitches are unaffected by that land take-up, but they're shifted marginally north within the school demise. Yeah, I think that's all I need to say. The only other thing that I didn't say in the presentation was that before the school were allowed to enter agreement to sell the land, the DFE have a requirement to vet sporting facilities at the school. They did, And the outcome of that was that no sporting facilities would be lost by the sale of that land, and they therefore allowed it to go ahead. The implication is that if it significantly affected sports facilities, they wouldn't have allowed the sale. But that's the current position. I hope that answers your question.
Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. Evening, David, and thank you for a very, very, very detailed account second time round. So reminded me very clearly that I had read it. I have a couple of questions for you. The first one is when you talked about the strip of land adjacent to the proposed development site, it's in private ownership. It's presumably not in the same private ownership as the piece of land that is going to be developed.
No, I don't know who owns it, but it's not in the same ownership.
Thank you. My second question is you talked about conditions. So given that this is an outline plan of permission, the detail shown is somewhat notional at this moment in time. But you've said from the conditions that have been, or you're proposing to put around it, the layout isn't likely to change very much. Was I right in understanding that?
It's only an opinion, but the illustrative layout seems to be the one that best fits that shape of land. Yes, it could change. What won't change are the heights that were specified by the applicant in the parameters and the areas of built form and the areas of landscaping. Those will be protected for those purposes, and it will be expected that the detailed layout that comes in as a reserved matter, if this application were to be approved, would have to conform with those parameters. But yeah, the illustrative layout could change within those constraints.
Okay, thanks. That answers that one, which leads me on to the next one, is the density of what's built on there. So at the moment it's proposing 180, I think, or 81 or something. But there's nothing to stop that density increasing within the same footprint. Yes, no?
No. The application is for up to 121 dwellings. For example, and this is totally hypothetical and theoretical, they could provide those within, say, 4 flatted blocks. So in fact, the built form on the site, whilst being tall, would be very small footprint on the whole site. And the footprint rather depends on the final mix of housing that they produce. If they produce more terraced units, it'll be slightly more compact. In terms of density, from memory, I think it was 28 dwellings per hectare, which is not a dense scheme.
Thank you, David. I'll tell you why I was asking that question. Given what's going on at the moment economically, and any estate agent would tell you that the market's as flat as you like, you've got the large-scale developers that are telling contractors not to work on or progress buildings beyond where they're committed contractually. So when you get a market that looks like that, my own personal experience tells me, and I can think of, as a for instance, the hospital site that started off as about 100 houses and ended up at 214 or 216, I believe, because the developers knew they couldn't sell the more expensive properties, so they built more and more small properties, which increased the density on the site, and the outcome of that then increases any traffic flows or anything the in and out of the site, so the egress and ingress, and given that you've only got one way in and out, that's kind of what's going on in my mind. Is there a possibility of putting a condition that controls the density, i.e. the number?
That would be open to us to suggest, yeah. Equally, they could build less if the market dictated. But yeah, you could do that.
I don't realistically think they would build less because we know what motivates developers. But if we could put a condition on it, which makes it more difficult for the density to change. I say it purely because I remember when they built the hospital site 20 years ago, and equally the site at Lower Dunton Road that started off at about 50 houses and ended up at 84. So it's that, how do we put the brakes on it so that if we are going to allow it, then at least we can ensure that, you know, the quality of what's built and it isn't turned into a much denser development.
Sorry, just via the chair, just to add a bit more meat on the bone with regards to that. So this application, it is definitive in terms of the number of units that are being proposed tonight, and that is a maximum number. If the applicants did seek to increase the density on the site, that would be subject to another planning application. So although I suppose a belt and braces approach could be considered, the description of development limits the number of homes. So if they did want to increase the number, it would be a standalone separate planning application. It would likely come back to planning committee and it would be determined on its own merits. But we do have that limiting factor of the description, which does state the maximum number of homes on the site. Appreciate what you're saying about the market at the moment. That's something the planning system, we can't force developers to complete developments. We can force them to start within a certain time period. And if they do not start within that time period, they lose that permission. And that's the control that we have in terms of the planning system, but I'm afraid that's as far as it goes. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. That makes me feel a lot more comfortable about going down that avenue. If I can, Chair, one more question? Yes. Which is on an entirely different subject. When I look through the assessment, it talks about the Sport England response, and they come up with their 5 exceptions, and one in particular leaps out at me, which is the proposed development affects only the land incapable of forming part of a playing pitch. And it strikes me that if the school needed to increase its scale, then that land is in a perfect location. It won't be, of course, if there's a road there and it's built on. So does that have any bearing on the thinking behind it?
I'll have to think about that one for a second. It doesn't really, because the application before you requires that piece of land and that piece of land only. It can't be replaced by another piece of land within the school ownership that is incapable of being used as a sports pitch.
Yeah, that's fine. I was just trying to check that my understanding of what I read was correct. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Chair. So through you, just point of clarification for members of committee. So within the Speaker's statement, there was reference to the previous committee recommending refusal of the application. When you actually check the minutes of the meeting that were agreed, it states the committee deferred the report pending clarity on Sport England's objection to the application and further information regarding the proposed enhancements. So it's slightly different from the point made in the Speaker's statement. The key thing really for members to consider is you have the previous committee reports to take that into account. You'll need to consider everything in front of you and come to your own sort of conclusion anyway. That's kind of the key thing to just sort of bear in mind. So obviously you've had the Speaker's statement, and please do kind of pick up any kind of comments as well with case officers before you come to any kind of conclusion.
So from the committee, do we have any more questions for David? Yes, Kevin.
Will there be any, I use the term loosely, guarantee on the school's part that the 3 temporary buildings will be demolished and replaced with a further football field?
At this particular moment in time, no, because this application is not an application made by the school, so it's not in their control. You will be faced with an application for the redevelopment of the school premises, as I said, in due course, and we think an application's coming in very soon, when it will entirely become reasonable to ensure that the temporary buildings are removed on completion of the rebuild. So yes, it will be removed. Yes, there will be a requirement that the sports pitch that was lost will be re-provided as part of any planning permission for the school buildings.
It's unfortunate that that hasn't been dealt with before we had this planning committee. We would then have been fully informed and everything would be open.
It's just the way in which these applications have fallen. This has been going for some time. We have been requesting information from the school, and the school have confirmed by letter that they will reinstate that sports pitch in due course. But being a reinstatement, it's not an enhancement, which is what the Sport England objection requires.
If there are no more questions, we'll open this to debate. Yeah. If I may, I should start the debate. Is it possible for you to put the plan, the outlining plan of what the estate might look like up again for me? Thank you, David. Yeah, we've been asked to make a decision about building what is determined as in the grey belt, in the green belt. I had the opportunity to walk around the field. It's there for fodder at the moment, and I find that the trouble with some fields that are close to habitation is that they're used by people who reside. And a lot of people use this particular area that is for fodder to walk their dogs. And on my walk around, the complete walk around the field, I noticed a sign that says, please keep dogs on the footpath because the grass used is for livestock fodder. Dogs' feces spread diseases. And that sign has been vandalised. So on my walk around the field, I noticed a location in the field close to where you exit to the housing estate where a large pile of dog poo bags have just been left. And they've been left on top of an electrical box. And I thought that was a bit out of order, really. And then walking around the field, I heard the trains go past, and it was very silent. The train didn't impact on my walk. And it's good to see that where the pylons are is going to be in the area that's going to be put aside for SUDs. So bearing in mind that in the plan there's going to be opportunities for people to still use that area to walk their dogs, and there will be the opportunity for dog litter bins, and it's providing 121 homes for Thurrock. I quite like it. I understand that Sports England have raised some issues, and I think we've given them the opportunity to consider those, and I think that they will be addressed in this application. So my opinion so far is to support this. Anybody else want any questions of debate? Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
Don't look sideways, that's the trouble. I have to say, I'm never going to fall in love with a scheme like this. I find it very difficult to, that part of the report tells us that the ambition of the school is to provide an artificial pitch. And I seem to recall from a year or two back that the cost to provide one was something like £1 to £1.4 million. So if they're very constrained on the amount of money they've got to spend on dealing with the building and getting it how they want, I think to say it's an ambition is probably the right word. It's an ambition, but it's a long way off. But then, you know, any goal you have to kind of stretch yourself to get to, but that'll be a hell of a stretch. So that kind of doesn't endear me to the whole thing, but I accept that about the pitch is kind of separate to the application in front of us. And the application in front of us, provided we could control the density, which Alan and David seem to have assured me that we can, and I am very conscious of that, then the likelihood, and the other thing I don't like about it is the fact there's only one way in and one way out, and it's quite a lot of houses, and if you multiply the number of those houses by the number of cars that are likely to end up there, I see that junction being a hell of a junction, and perhaps at some stage would need to be a roundabout. But I guess generally, given the corner that we're in until we've got the new local plan, then reluctantly I will support it. Thanks, Chair.
In respect of the only one way onto this estate and one way off, looking at it as a crime prevention, I thought, you know, it's going to make it a much safer estate to live on if you've only got one means to enter and one means to leave, and with these very good boundaries to it. So I'm hoping that this might be a very safe place to live in the future. Peggy.
Well, I disagree, because there should be at least an emergency exit route for people. If there was a fire or whatever, there should be more than one way in, one way out.
Got to be gated.
Yeah, Matt, can you help here, because there is a pedestrian access across the railway line off the estate as well. Perhaps you can explain further.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. The highways is as part of the outline, so it's not been reserved, so this has been looked at in quite detail for a transport assessment that accompanied the application. Fundamentally, the number of dwellings that is accessed from that single point of access is acceptable in terms of highway design. You wouldn't normally expect a secondary access until you get to around about 290 to 300, and then you would start getting into that emergency vehicle access or secondary access points being required to distribute the traffic out. The development junction that has been assessed, I've jotted down a few notes from the discussions that's been happening. The Butts Lane is split between an urban road and a rural road. So where the rural road classification starts is about 35 metres to the south of the crossing point, which is currently to the south of the proposed junction. There it goes into a 40-mile-an-hour speed limited road. That was reduced as part of the Butts Lane development that occurred 10 years ago to try and reduce the speed of vehicles on that road. That was supported by the police through engagement with them. There is also a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit that was implemented about 5 years ago as part of a government incentive to try and promote more active travel in the area. And that starts just to the north of the St Andrews Road roundabout, which is about 40 metres to the north of the access junction. When we assessed the junction, it was identified that there was a potential conflict with people transitioning from the 40-mile-an-hour speed limit to the 30, and that they may continue at a higher speed, and that was supported by the speed data that they provided. That's why the applicant has proposed to put in traffic calming features as a gateway feature, so a raised table, so humps and raising the entire platform of the junction up, so it tries to promote that safety of go through that junction. When looking at the traffic impact, the transport assessment has identified in the morning peak hour, which is normally the busiest time of the day, that it's around about 33 vehicles going out of the site, and around about 47 in the other direction. So that works out to be about one vehicle every 2 to 3 minutes, which, you know, doesn't then enable that much traffic to build up at the junction to cause a significant or severe impact. That's not to say that this development will create an impact on Butts Lane, so there will be an increase in traffic on that road, but it is identified as not being severe, as identified in our council policy or within the MPPF.
Thank you. Anybody else, anything else to debate? Peggy?
Sorry, I've got another question about the schools. 120 houses, you're talking about probably over 200 children. Have the schools got capacity? I don't know what the capacity they've got at the moment.
Can anybody answer that question, even
Yeah,
though
I
it's
can.
a debate?
The situation is that you tend to use a ratio figure per dwelling for calculating the number of school children that are likely to occupy the houses. That ratio is that for primary school children, it's about 0.35 children per dwelling. So if you multiply that, it's 45, 50 children that will occupy houses that will need school places. In terms of where we are in educational place availability terms, it is determined that there are some schools with capacity, but other schools in the catchment area are oversubscribed. So we've taken the view that actually the developer needs to provide contributions for the education authority to provide additional places, which might be in the form of additional classrooms at one school, or the creation of a number of places at various different schools within the catchment to accommodate a small number of children each, which doesn't need new building. So the contribution that is requested, the final sum has to be agreed with the SEN specialist provision, will be for the creation of additional primary places. As regards secondary school children, the ratio that you use is much lower. It's about 0.17 secondary school child per dwelling. It will still nevertheless generate a large number of places required. And the Mossbourne academies, which are within the catchment, have spare capacity today and forecast to still have spare capacity by 2029. I use that figure because that's the forecast that the Education Authority use, and it's likely that the houses, if this was permitted, would come on stream around that time, really. So there are sufficiently secondary school places, if that answers your question.
There's also a question about the pressure on dental surgeries, doctor surgeries. You've got a lot more people coming into the area.
The response to that is that we do consult the NHS. The NHS have requested a single contribution, which we as an authority collect and pass on to ring fence provision within the local area, but the total sum requested, I think, was £94,700, which the developer has to pay to do one of two things. It either provides additional surgery space for more doctors to see more patients, or it upgrades systems at the nearby practice to allow them to accommodate the population that arises from the scheme. It's not anything that we get closely involved in. We just simply note the request for contribution, require the developer to provide it. The developer has agreed to provide it, so there will be some improvement, but that will be carried out by the NHS themselves.
Thank you, David. Does anybody else have any more items for debate? Joe.
I'm really struggling to understand the position of the committee with regards to paragraph 104 of the MPPF. We have a statutory consultee objecting under this paragraph. We don't have any commitment from the school to satisfy under the MPPF 104. So I'm interested in how the committee has come to the position that that has been satisfied.
Sorry, for you, Chair. So that's for the committee, a question to the committee rather than the officers. Yeah.
So if there's no more items of debate, perhaps we can move on to the recommendations. The recommendation is that the Chief Planning Officer be authorised to grant permission for the development subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement, payment of RAMs, and those conditions set out in Section 16 of the original report, which is appended. Do we have a proposer for the recommendation? Thank you, Steve. Do we have a seconder for the recommendation? I'll second. If we can move on to the vote then, those in favour of the recommendation, if you can please raise your hand nice and clear so it can, your votes can be recorded. Those in favour? Those that vote against the recommendation? Because the recommendation has not been carried, you're going to need to put forward an alternative recommendation that has planning conditions attached to it. So if we can just concentrate on planning issues in the recommendation. Thank you. Is there anybody who's got a recommendation?
I think we should hear what Neil Spate had to say from somebody called Carly.
Okay, through you, Chair. So, Councillor, if you could just turn your mic off, please. Yeah, through you, Chair. So, committee need to come up with their own reasons. So, ultimately, yes, Councillor Neil Spate, Mr. Spate has provided a statement and he's provided something to Carly. You've obviously got access to the public file, so I don't know if that has been submitted as part of the application. But ultimately, you can't really use someone else's reasons. You've got to form them yourself. Okay, so I'm sure you're clear, but someone needs to put forward those reasons now, and then what we will do is David, Alan and myself will provide comment on those reasons for you, and then we can sort of move to vote at that point.
Can I ask for a point of clarification? If we are rejecting the recommendation today, can we defer to provide that recommendation at a later date?
Okay, you can defer. You just need to be aware that obviously this is subject to non-determination appeal, because effectively will be over time. I can't remember exactly what extension of time we've agreed, but I'm sure we will be over time. So yes, it is within your gift to do a recommendation to defer, but again, you will need to give your reasons, and then we would need to contact the agent to see if they are willing to agree to a deferral, but they may well appeal non-determination. Yes, so just getting a message that end of June is the date, so ultimately we would be technically over time. So just so members are completely clear, so non-determination appeal is where the council hasn't determined the application within the prescribed timescale. So we have a set period to determine applications. With this particular application, we'd already agreed an extension to that to the end of June. So what the applicant can then do, if we go over, is effectively submit an appeal, which will be considered by the planning inspectorate. So the power for decision is effectively taken away from the council. So it's just a risk to be aware of.
I mean, personally, with this application, I think we have a statutory consultee objecting, and that hasn't been put forward in the recommendation. It hasn't been satisfied. There's been no mitigation for that, and all we have is essentially a plan to potentially address them, and I think they need to be fully addressed. They are, at the end of the day, a statutory consultee.
Councillor Fuller, that was the reason why it was postponed on the last occasion, and Sports England have been consulted again, and that's been taken into consideration. That's why now here we need to make a decision about the recommendation, or if someone wants to put an additional recommendation, then they will need to make one up, to make it ready.
Would the recommendation not be the recommendation of Sport England from the ejection, and to satisfy that objection?
So what you can ultimately give weight to Sport England's response. I mean, I think we've tried to engage in that process, so ultimately we're back at committee now, so I don't foresee any kind of fruitful kind of discussions with Sport England or the applicant resulting in anything different. So yes, you can give weight to the loss of playing field. That's a material sort of weight you can give. You obviously need to bear in mind all the other kind of factors that you need to give substantial weight to that David's articulated. So if you are going down that route, as it were, loss of playing field, you just need to kind of bear in mind that you're giving more significant weight to that than all those other factors. I'll ask colleagues to sort of come in, but if that's where you're going, yes, that is a material reason to consider.
Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, my main problem is still the access where there's only one way in. Now, we've spoken about this strip of land along the western side. We don't know who owns it, but is that not possible? Sorry, is that not possible for the council as a whole to look at purchasing a part, if not all of that land, to procure an access route there? Because come 4 o'clock, 3:30, 4 o'clock, you're going to have several thousand children coming out of that school on potentially a very, very busy road. That's my main concerns. If we could do that, then I would be happy to support it.
David, can you assist with that?
Well, yes, I think the council could eventually seek to purchase that strip of land. But they have to be sure, well, you have to go through a very rigorous exercise. Compulsory purchase would be as a proportion of full market value of the site, so it would be very expensive. It would take a considerable amount of time because the owner has a right to object and it go to a hearing, so it could take more than 2 years to resolve, 3 years, 4 years. So in theory you could, it's just not practical because in the meantime the applicant is likely to go to appeal either on non-determination or a refusal, and the matter will be taken out of your hands, really. That's my concern.
And via the chair, just adding to that. So ultimately, we are here to determine the planning application that is in front of us. There is one access proposed, which it's been assessed by the Highway Authority in terms of highway safety and capacity, and it has been deemed to be acceptable from a technical point of view. In terms of gaining another access, that's not for consideration here. It is the application that is in front of us tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just explaining my position because I don't want to be responsible for the potential death of a child in that area where that second access point isn't provided. I understand all the implications, don't get me wrong, I do understand that, but I would not want that on my conscience.
So if any of you are in a position to prepare an alternative recommendation, is that possible? Yes, Steve.
I again are quite concerned about the fact that there's only one way in and one way out of that site. Even if it had a secondary means of escape with gated access, that can be accessed by the emergency services. I would feel more happy with that than just having one way in and one way out at the moment.
Does anybody have an alternative recommendation? You've taken your microphone off. We've heard your debate, but we need now an alternative recommendation. So between you, you're going to need to write or form a recommendation that we can all vote on.
So to assist members, obviously, we can't come up with the reasons. What we can do is identify anything that's been raised during debate. Now, there was really only 2 points that have just sort of come out in debate, which is the loss of playing field and the highways. Now, the latter point with respect to access and the highways point, I think my colleague, Matthew Ford, who's our head of sort of highways development management matters, representing the Highway Authority, has provided sort of clear advice to committee. So I would be strongly advising committee that that is not a substantiated reason for refusal, while it's a material point and you can come to a different view. That is going to be very challenging to defend, being candid. With respect to the loss of playing field, my professional opinion is that the loss of the playing field does not outweigh the other material points that David articulated, particularly in respect to the kind of housing need. So they're really the kind of 2 points. I don't know, Alan, is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Yes, via the chair. So, as Mr. Baldwin has stated, the highway safety aspect has been fully assessed in line with current legislation, guidance, and fully understanding where the debate has covered that. But ultimately, we want the same thing. We want to make sure that the access and egress from this site is acceptable, and it is acceptable in highways terms, and that's a highly material aspect with regards to the technical endorsement that we've received from the head of highways. The other point about the loss of playing field, there is an objection from Sport England. As Mr. Baldwin has said, it is material to the consideration of this application, and it's just ensuring that as part of your consideration in this, it's the harm, the loss of the playing field is not outweighed, and it's just for the committee to weigh that in the planning balance.
So, committee, I understand that the Sports England can't overrule this planning. They've obviously given their comments, which are to be expected, that they don't want to see any loss of playground, of playing pitches. But there is on offer an all-weather pitch. The existing pitches will be reorganised so that no pitches will be lost. So with that, and regards the access to the site can only be one access, because the land along Butts Lane is not owned. Can we consider again a vote on the recommendation, unless someone can actually bring up an alternative recommendation that we can vote on? We're just going to get some advice for you.
When considering planning applications, the main view should be where the evidence leads you. So if we have experts in the highway which says that the highway is satisfactory, it will be very, especially is the council expert, it will be very difficult for us to then go back and say, unless we have substantial evidence, to say otherwise. And so if then our concerns are mainly the highway, and we take a view against our own recommendation, as Ash was saying earlier, it can be ground for appeal, and on appeal, it will be outside of our hand then. So ideally, if we can control the application at this stage through considering all the points, and I do like the creative point of purchasing land as well. However, there are limitations to that one as well. So the compulsory purchase, it's when negotiations have failed and there is an absolute necessity for public good to use those powers, because it has to be balanced against the landowner's right of not wanting to sell. So there are creative ways of doing this. However, we have to work within the legal framework, which is heavily based on the evidence presented on the day.
So just to assist committee then, so I think where we are, ultimately, it doesn't appear to me that you're in a position, you don't seem to be in a position where you can support the officer recommendation. I may be wrong. What we do need to do is ultimately come up with a decision. Now, those points that we've picked up, my professional advice is they are not substantially strong. Now, it's within committee's gift to make a decision, but I think Councillor Fuller articulated a point earlier of deferring the item. Now, you do have an option in front of you whereby you could do a minded to refuse decision, and then we will come back with a further report on those reasons, and I think the reasons effectively are loss of playing field and the sort of access point. I mean, my view is they are pretty comprehensively covered already in the report, but that is an option in front of you if you don't feel you can kind of come up with an alternative recommendation that you necessarily want to take forward. That is perhaps a way forward, members.
Could we ask, I mean, as an alternative recommendation to satisfy paragraph 104 of the MPPF, that secured mitigation needs to be obtained to the statutory committee's concerns?
Yes, so we can certainly pick that up in a follow-up report. So I would just need to be clear from committee. Now, is that you requesting it to come back with a minded to refuse, or do you wish to defer on the basis of simply addressing paragraph 104?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part? Apologies.
Yeah. So are the committee asking officers to defer the item with further information when set against paragraph 104 of the MPPF, or are committee minded to refuse the application as a result of loss of playing field and linking that to paragraph 104 of the MPPF?
I mean, personally speaking for myself, without the satisfaction of meeting paragraph 104 for the MPPF, I'm inclined to refuse.
Okay, so what I advise members is that a member comes up with a minded to refuse recommendation, which can be, as you just articulated, Councillor Fuller, and perhaps you may wish to include the access points. Now, my view, and legal can come in if they wish, I do not consider them substantiated, so it should be a minded to refuse, and then we will need to bring that to committee, and committee just need to be aware that the applicant may well just decide to appeal non-determination. So does ultimately that will need to come from a member, as in terms of the recommendation, because we are at paragraph 7.2 of the Constitution, so I can't make that recommendation. But from what I've heard, it's the loss of playing field and the access point. So if a member wants to articulate that, then we could move to the vote on that, Chair.
Thank you. So if perhaps yourself, Jack, you've raised this, can formulate your recommendation for the rest of the committee to vote on?
My recommendation is that section 104 of the MPPF is satisfied via a secured mitigation that satisfies the statutory consultees' recommendations.
Did you want to include access in that recommendation?
I guess an alternative committee member can probably talk on that greater than myself, but that's my personal recommendation.
Does any other member wish to add to this recommendation?
Yeah, the access one.
Thank you.
So on that basis, members of committee, and please do come in legal if you wish, there's 2 points there, and as I said, I do not consider them to be substantiated, so I strongly advise it's a minded to refuse recommendation. And if you move to the vote, I'll, I think, Chair, that we can make a log of those reasons, but I think it would be based on those reasons, so just bear in mind you'd be voting on both those reasons. Anything there you want to add, Andre? No? Okay, thank you. Okay, so I will try articulate that for members of committee. Just so the reasons that I received from Councillor Fuller is a minded to refuse the application linked to paragraph 104 of the NPPF and specifically the loss of playing field. And then from Councillor Davis, inappropriate access, insufficient access with respect to the quantum of development. And again, that would be a minded to refuse. So it would be for those 2 reasons that we received from committee. We would then come back with an additional report to committee.
If you're all prepared, we can go for a vote on the amended recommendation, but first we need a proposer. Thank you, Jack. And a seconder. Thank you, Peggy. If we go to the vote then, those in favour of the amended recommendation, please raise your hands. And those against the recommendation, please raise your hands. Thank you. The amended recommendation is passed. Just to bring in standing orders, to continue with this meeting this evening, I need your consent to continue. Is that okay for the rest of the committee? Yeah. Thank you. We're now going to move on to item 8 of the agenda, which is 1 Ball Close, Chafford 100. Can I please ask Agnesa Rafe to present the report, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. The application site relates to 1 Bull Close in Chafford 100 in Grays. The application is householder application seeking permission for a 2-storey site extension above the existing garage and driveway area whilst retaining undercroft parking below. This application has been called in before the planning committee by some former councillors and Councillor Shinnick in order to consider matters relating to the alleged existing use of the property and proposed impact upon the character and visual amenity of the locality. On this slide, you can see the location of the site. The site is located on the northern side of Bull Close, within an established residential area in Trafford 100. Oh. Apology. This is an aerial view of the site. The property benefits from the attached garage to the western side of the property and the existing conservatory to the rear. On the next slide, you can see the existing site plan. This is the proposed site plan. The two-story site extension will be built above the existing garage. The single-story rear extension would replace the existing conservatory, which you can see it's marked over here. Both parking spaces are retained, and a new cycle store is proposed to the rear garden. Here are the photos of the property, the front of the property as well as the rear. And existing floor plans. The property is currently a three-bedroom property with all three bedrooms located on the first floor. These are the proposed floor plans. At ground floor, the rear extension would provide an enlarged kitchen and dining area, replacing the existing conservatory. This rear extension would not have any detrimental impact upon adjoining and adjacent neighbors and would fully comply with the guidance set out in a residential alterations and extension supplementary planning document. The adjoining garage, garage parking and access would also not be affected by any elements of the proposal. At first floor level, the side extension above the garage would create additional bedroom with an ensuite, which is here, and would increase the size of the existing third bedroom. The property, therefore, consequently, will become a four-bedroom dwelling. The garage and the driver parking are both retained, with two off-street parking spaces continuing to be provided. In here, you can see the existing elevations of the property. And here we have the proposed elevations. The two-story site extension will feature a gable roof, which is slightly set back from the front elevation of the existing dwelling. There are no windows proposed within a flank elevation of the site extension, so there will be no overlooking towards the neighbors to the west of the site. The single-story rear extension has a flat roof, and given its position to the rear, it would not be visible from the street. Materials proposed as an external finish to the property would also match the existing dwelling. In summary, to summarize, the proposed design is considered acceptable and would not have a negative impact upon the neighboring properties. Thurrock Highways raised no objection to proposed parking provision, subject to conditions securing the retention of the two parking spaces. Members will be aware that some objections have been received from neighboring residents. Having carefully considered those representations, the concerns raised relate primarily to the alleged management and use of the property. Matters such as noise, refuse storage, or antisocial behavior fall outside the scope of this householder planning application and would need to be addressed through separate legislation by the environmental protection, environmental enforcement, and antisocial behavior teams. These matters would not prevent the submission or consideration of this current planning application. The applicant has confirmed that the property is currently rented out and is only used as a residential dwelling under use class C3. Nevertheless, a planning enforcement complaint has been logged and will be investigated to establish whether there is any breach of planning control. The proposal is considered to comply with policies CSTP 22, CSTP 23, PMD1, PMD2, and PMD8 of the adopted core strategy and the residential alterations and extensions supplementary planning document, and the application is recommended for approval. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your report. We've had a letter from the applicant, Mr. Bancoli. Have you had the opportunity to read it? With that in mind, that you've read his response, could you please ask any questions of the planning officer? Oh, sorry. Sorry, do we have a speaker? Okay, I'm sorry, sir. Thank you, Mr. Gravitt. You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of many of my neighbours. I'd like to begin by clarifying that the owner, Mr. Bancoli, does not live at the property and has not done so for some time. Instead, the property has been used as a rental or short-term let for at least the last 10 years. It's also been consistently operated as a multi-occupancy property. I therefore wish to formally object to this planning application, which proposes expanding the house from 3 to 4 bedrooms for a rear and side extension. Whilst this may appear to be a modest change, the reality is quite different. The property is currently advertised online as accommodating up to 9 people within a small 3-bedroom end of terrace house. Increasing it to 4 bedrooms would almost certainly lead to even higher occupancy levels. Firstly, this is not functioning as a typical family home. It is effectively being run as a short-term commercial let with a constant turnover of occupants who have no long-term connection to the neighbourhood. This has resulted in frequent noise disruption and lack of accountability. There have been multiple incidents requiring police attendance due to illegal or antisocial behaviour, and I have evidence of this along with the dates. Secondly, parking is already a serious concern. The current use generates far more traffic than a normal household, with guests often arriving in multiple vehicles and being unfamiliar with local restrictions. This leads to congestion, blocked driveways and unsafe conditions. With a primary school nearby, this poses a real risk to children's safety. Increased occupancy will only make this worse. Thirdly, waste management is an ongoing problem. The property regularly produces excessive rubbish, which is often not handled correctly. This leads to spillage, unpleasant odours and vermin, and negatively affects the street, and I have photographic evidence of this, which has been passed to the owner in the past. I have personally had to intervene to ensure bins are put out for collection. Again, increased occupancy will likely intensify this issue. This application is not simply about adding an extra bedroom. It represents a further intensification of a use that is already causing harm to the local environment and significantly impacting residents' quality of life. Despite repeated complaints from us and our neighbours via WhatsApp messages to the landlord, of which we can evidence, these issues are ongoing and have not been resolved. In conclusion, I urge the committee to consider not just physical extension, but the ongoing pattern of use. Approving the application risks further commercialising a residential property at the expense of the community. For these reasons, I respectfully request the application be refused. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Gravitt?
Evening. What has any evidence been submitted to the committee regarding the online advertisement for, was it 9 occupants?
Yeah, nothing's been submitted, but I've got the websites that it's been advertised on. There was 3 websites it's been advertised on. Therewith, I tell you, we have it's on booking.com, it's on Agoda, Skyscanner and Kasai. Really obscure websites. We get multiple people staying at the property. Normally, they turn up in minibuses. It's workers from overseas that come and work at ports or anywhere around the country. They'll stay for during the day, during the week, and then move on. That's on a typical. We've also had other ones where it's been antisocial behaviour that police have been involved in.
In the advertisements, is there any specific descriptions around what they're aiming to rent the property for, in terms of in terms of what you mentioned there, of workers and worker accommodation?
No, it doesn't say anything like that specifically. When we've challenged the owner before about the type of people putting in, he has said, I'll try and vet them more thoroughly, but that hasn't been the case.
Peggy.
Have you got evidence that you said there were up to 9 people that they allow in that small, tiny house?
Yeah, it's advertised online and saying it accepts 9 people.
Do you have a further question, Peggy? Steve.
Unless I'm not reading this correctly, looking at the rooms on the first floor, there are actually 5 what could be bedrooms, not 4.
What, on the planned extension?
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
So it's even worse than we first imagined.
From how I'm reading the plans, that the small box room looks like a kind of doorway type thing coming to another room with an ensuite off the back of that, which is our concern that it's just exacerbating the size of the property with the problems that we receive.
Just from a planning point of view, I would have liked to have seen all of the rooms designated as to what their actual usages are.
If you can just limit it to questions, please. I've got Steve next. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Just a question for you. Presumably this has been going on from what I've observed for some long period of time. Has anybody looked at or spoken to anybody in the local authority around licensing? Because it sounds more like it's being used as an HMO to me, in which case the way to deal with it really is it would have to be licensed, and that would exercise the control over it. Has that been done?
Not that I'm aware of. Councillor Hartstein was going to look into that prior to the re-election. But as my understanding, there's an Airbnb kind of circumnavigates the reasons for a HMO. So, you don't need to have a licence for an Airbnb as you do for a HMO.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm unaware. It's not a planning issue, so I'm not familiar with how that works. But thank you.
That's right. I was a lettings manager prior to being retired, so that's my understanding.
Are there any more questions from Jack and then Peggy?
Was there any concerns with regards to the design of the proposal?
Only that the parking states that there's 2 parking spaces, which there is only 1 parking space and an unused garage. The garage door has been broken for many years, and from where I've seen it open before, it's just full of rubbish. No one uses the garage. It's too small to be used for a normal car. So, saying it's 2 parking spaces is not quite the case.
Peggy?
You said that there's an enforcement notice. Has that been finalised? Have they looked in? Has anyone come back on that?
An enforcement notice? I didn't say there was, sorry. What was that about, Peggy?
Sorry?
What was that about, an enforcement notice? I don't know.
Well, there was a planning enforcement notice placed on the property, and that's undergoing investigation at the moment.
I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So,
sorry.
Yep. So I think case officer set out that there's an enforcement investigation. The pertinent point here for committee really is what you're considering is effectively a residential extension. Okay, so that's really what you've got to focus your mind upon. So you need to, we can't second guess alternative uses. if the property is not being used in accordance with the permission, then that may well trigger a planning enforcement investigation or a licence, you know, through elsewhere, you know, HMO licence. But what you need to sort of concentrate upon is actually that proposal that's in front of you. And I think Councillor Fuller raised a question around sort of design, so that's a completely appropriate sort of planning question. But those kind of other points we have to pick up separately, and you certainly can't consider sort of non-planning reasons in your assessment, councillors.
Do we have any more questions for Mr. Gravitt? Thank you, sir. You can please stay if you like. Thank you. Any questions for the planning officer? Steve?
Have you investigated the house to see what actual involvement there's been on the property with regarding the police? Another argument that I've had with people, and what the building is being used for.
Thank you. Your microphone, Steve.
Thank you, Chair, if I may. Good evening, members. The first time that the local authority, from a planning perspective, were aware of any planning enforcement complaint was when this application came in. So there is no previous planning enforcement history for the site at all. But that planning enforcement complaint, as noted by members, is currently underway and under investigation. And we're in dialogue with the owner, and we're also aware of the sites referred to by the residents. So we are looking at that at the moment. But as the Chief Planning Officer advised, that is a separate matter to the consideration of the householder planning application in front of members tonight. With respect to the inspection of the site has been visited by both the Planning Officer as part of the assessment of the application, and there's been dialogue with the applicant, who has confirmed repeatedly it is a private rented property, and indeed you've seen the evidence that they've submitted within their statement before you all. With respect to the concerns about police involvement, they would be entirely separate from any planning merits or material considerations for the application, and it wouldn't be for the assessment of this application to consider any police involvement at all, but would certainly be for any residents to raise separately and outside of the planning legislation, as well as with, you know, regarding any antisocial behaviour concerns and so on.
Steve.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the report as well. I don't think anybody got round to that bit yet, but thank you. Two questions regarding that. One is clearly the intention is to put an extension over the top of half of the garage. So presumably the garage within it, or the double garage as it's constructed, is that wall in between substantial enough to hold what's being built, or does that wall have to be taken out and rebuilt? I'm just thinking of the impact on whoever's garage is the other side of it.
As far as we know, structurally, it's absolutely acceptable to have this extension above the garage, and it won't have any effect on the parking.
Thank you. One further question before you rush off. It wasn't going to be that easy. Looking at the parking, and I think equally from what the speaker was saying, that the garage is not really usable or used. So there's a parking space in front of the garage. In your diagram, you don't need to go to it, but in it, it showed in front of what I would guess would be a kitchen window or something, a motorbike. And I know it was only as a description, but is that, how wide is that? Would it accommodate a car, or is it only wide enough for maybe a motorbike or whatever? I'm just trying to think of the amount of parking that would be available based on the proposed scale of the building.
No, there are only 2 parking spaces proposed at the front. And yes, there is a slight space to the right. I think that's what you're referring to for a motorbike. We consulted highways officers in that respect, and this has been confirmed, that this will be completely acceptable.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Through you, Chair, if I might also add that the proposal involves no loss of any existing off-street parking at the site and no impact to the adjoining neighbours' garage and their parking and access either. Through Chair, may I also further respond to Councillor Davies, S. Davies' comment about the room layout, because I'm conscious I didn't pick that up, and that was one of the queries you had, if I may, Chair, through you. So on the proposed layout, as was pointed out by members, the proposal proposes a fourth bedroom and an enlarged third bedroom. And I appreciate that there could be other uses on the ground floor. That's not shown on the existing proposed layout, and what we've considered is a four-bedroom property.
Thank you. Any more questions for the planning officer? Yes, Michael.
In the application overview 1.1, is this like a common, it seems to me like it's quite a common configuration that people do? The removal of the existing conservatory, erection of a single storey, that's quite common.
Through you, Chair, the removal and replacement of the existing lawful conservatory with a brick-built re-extension is very commonplace, absolutely.
Are there any further questions? So we'll open this to debate. Who would like to go first? Yes, Steve.
Thanks, Chair. I'm very much in two minds with this, but the difficulty I have is that from a legal standpoint and a planning standpoint, it's not a big deal. It's a fairly straightforward application. I think the issues for me, and certainly listening to the speaker, are all around what's actually happening with the building. But the difficulty in my head is that I'm very receptive to that, but at the same time, it isn't a planning constraint. It's much more around licensing and enforcement action and various other teams. So I'm very torn on it, but I think on the basis that from a planning perspective, I find it difficult to really fault what's being proposed. I kind of have to support it. I'm equally very conscious of the fact that it's clearly caused some issues in the past. It's a shame that the letter we got from the owner, it's a shame he wasn't here to speak or to answer questions. We may have been somewhat more helpful to us to move it forward. But I have to look at it from a legality point of view. I don't really think I would be able to say no. So I guess I would support it. Thanks, Chair.
And I can support what Councillor Taylor says also. It's looking at this as a pure extension to a property. As planning, that's what we're required to do. The enforcement aspect of things perhaps should have happened sooner. It can still continue, but this evening, to look at the extension application as it is, I think we may be not in a position to not recommend it. Any further debate? Peggy, then Steve.
Well, I'm concerned because the property was originally classified as a three-bedroom residential property for a single family use. So that's a Class C3 classification. doesn't that mean that it's only a maximum of 6 people should really be living in it? And if they're advertising it, and it's clear that they're advertising it, to allow 9 people, up to 9 people, as it currently stands as an Airbnb, isn't that clashing?
So, yeah, and feel free to come in, legal. So the use class is still as what was originally prescribed. So that use class is not in front of you to be recommended to be changed. Scale is a relevant consideration here. On the enforcement points, as we've tried to articulate, that's a separate process. And just so to be completely clear, we operate our planning enforcement service on a reactive basis. So those enforcement queries have only just come through the system. So yes, it would be lovely to have that investigation completed. However, it's not. And again, what you've got in front of you is effectively a householder application. And that's how you must consider this application. Andre, anything you want to add?
Yes, yes, perfect. We have to be careful that we don't have cross purposes here. Our purpose at the moment is to consider this current planning application. Yes, there is an investigation for another purpose of the use, but our current purpose is to look at the merits as they're currently presented. So whether the enforcement notices affects the current planning application, it doesn't seem to be, because it's on a matter of what we know so far is one is for the extension and the other is for the current use of that. So yeah, we have to be very careful of not cross-purposing our view.
Councillor Taylor, you have a question?
Yeah, and it's probably one for Ashley and our legal bodies over there. Is it possible to put a condition in place that they can't actually move forward with the development until the enforcement has been resolved? Or is that... it's just a question, sorry.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So there's tests that we have to abide by with respect to planning conditions. So in my opinion, that would be an unreasonable condition. Effectively, we've got to be able to enforce a condition, so we're undertaking an enforcement investigation. We could include an informative, and in terms of making sure the use is in line with that C3 use. So an informative doesn't have the same weight as a planning condition, unfortunately. So it's just something that we can add. It's like a note, really. But members can do that, and we have a wording, and I'll read that wording now. So the applicant is advised that the consent hereby granted relates solely to the extension of the property as shown on the plans approved, and on the basis that the property remains within planning use class C3 dwelling house, as defined by the Town and Country Planning Use Classes Order 1987 as amended. Separate planning permission will be required in the event of the property being used as a house of multiple occupation. So if that was to satisfy members, we can add that as informative. But again, I just need to sort of say that ultimately that is not something we can actually enforce. So it's not a condition, unfortunately. But you could do that.
Steve, did you have a question earlier? Any further questions before we go? No.
And further to what Ash said, we have to also be careful that it's an investigation stage at the moment, so there is no enforcement notice that has been issued. It's something entirely separate again to what we've been asked to decide today. And so with a reasonableness test, if somebody cannot get an application or can get an application solely based on an investigation, it's unlikely to be a reasonable approach for any committee. So we need to stick to, or we should rather stick to, the application that is in front of us, and the investigation is something to be dealt with as a separate legal procedure.
So can we not hold this up until the investigation's taken place?
Because they're not connected, because they're not connected, it would be highly likely that it's found unreasonable behavior from the council. Because, again, the current use of the dwelling is under investigation. So it's not even, as a matter of fact, an enforcement notice. It's still very, very early stages. And what is being proposed is a future extension of the building. So again, that's whether the extension is going to facilitate the current use. That's a different question together, but they don't. They're two ships in total separate pods, so they have their own merits to be decided by, and so to try and to link them together would highly likely be unreasonable from the council. But we can insert the Ashley's recommendation as part of our decision.
Then if we can move to recommendation that the Chief Planning Officer be authorised to grant planning permission for the development subject to those conditions set out in section 16 of this report. Do we have a proposer? Seconder? Okay. If we can move to the vote, those in favour, please raise your hands. One moment, please. Right, the informative.
Members, so in that recommendation, would you like to include that informative? Okay, so if you could, I can reread it out if you wish,
Yeah,
Chair.
if you could, please.
Okay. Okay, just bear with me. So the recommendation is as articulated in the report and will include the following informative. The applicant is advised that the consent hereby granted relates solely to the extension of the property as shown on the plans approved and on the basis that the property remains within planning use class C3 dwelling house as defined by the Town and Country Planning Use Classes Order 1987 as amended. Separate planning permission will be required in the event of the property being used as a house of multiple occupation.
So, with that addition, can we go to the vote? Those that are in favour? That recommendation is carried. I think we can take a 5-minute adjournment before the next item on the agenda. Thank you. Carry on with item agenda number 9, which is the full planning permission for 21 to 25 the High Street Grays, which you can find on pages 117 to 134 of your report. If we can have the report then, please, from Lottie. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Sorry, a bit heavy-handed there. Thank you. This full planning application seeks permission for the erection of a rear extension and 2 additional floors, including external and internal alterations, and the part change of use from shops and ancillary space which fall within Class E under the Town and Country Planning Use Classes Order 1987 as amended, to form a hotel which falls under Use Class C1 with 35 bedrooms. The application follows a previously approved scheme, reference 25/00852/FUL, which was granted planning permission in January of 2026 for the erection of a rear extension and one additional floor, including external and internal alterations, and the part change of use from shops and ancillary space to a hotel with 26 bedrooms. This permission has not been implemented, but remains extant until January 2029. The application site relates to numbers 21 to 25 High Street, Grays, which is on the eastern side of High Street. The site is located within Grays Town Centre, where there is an expectation that there would be continued retail and commercial uses on the ground floor. The 3 ground floor units are all currently operating commercially. The proposals seek to remove the existing commercial use of the centre of the 3 units to provide the main entrance for the hotel. As hotels would not be considered an uncharacteristic use for a town centre and would continue to provide employment, the proposal would not conflict with the land use policy for the town centre. Here are some images of the site. It would be the pawnbrokers, as shown, that would be converted to the hotel reception area. Here are some further images north-south along the High Street, and some images of the rear of the site, which is essentially a rear access and service yard. These plans show the existing elevational details. As you can see, the existing building is 2 stories and is the same towards the rear of the site. The existing floor plans show the 3 commercial units with their storage and associated commercial areas above. This slide shows the proposed and ground and first floor plans, which seek to change the central unit to the main entrance lobby. Part of the ground floor area of Unit 21 would also be converted to provide lift and stairway access to the hotel, but both Units 21 and 25 would continue within their current commercial uses. Here are the 2nd and 3rd floor plans as proposed, and this also shows the proposed roof plan. The proposed elevations show that the proposed 1st and 2nd floor would be finished in white render, reflecting the adjoining elevations to the north, whilst the highest story elevation would be finished in brickwork, reflecting the existing building at ground floor level and adjoining buildings immediately to the south. The 4th story aspect would be set back from the front elevation and inset from either side boundary. Part of the flat roof area would be enclosed by a 1.1 metre high balustrade, which appears as a balcony area when viewed from the high street, but the application has assured that this is essentially for maintenance access to the lift shaft and won't be accessible by guests. Grays High Street features a mix of 2- and 3-storey buildings with a variety of roof forms and heights. However, the introduction of a 4th story is considered excessive in contrast to existing development, resulting in a prominent and out-of-character impact upon the wider street scene. The proposal also includes the introduction of the lift shaft, which would be of an even greater height and exacerbates the overall visual impact. By virtue of its height, mass, scale, form, detailed design, and use of materials, the proposal would result in a visually detached form of development, which would appear incongruous within the street scene and therefore harmful. It is worth noting, having just said that the majority of the high street is 2- and 3-storey buildings, this is generally the case, but the Barclays building on the corner of High Street and Clarence Road is host to a stairwell and boiler room, which does sit atop that 2nd floor, so provides essentially that additional story again as sought. However, this element of the building has a much smaller footprint than the proposed additional story, which would occupy the bulk of the roof space across the width of 3 commercial units. It features no windows and is used solely for plant and maintenance purposes, in contrast to the current proposal, and visibility from the public realm is limited, as seen in these photos. The application site, however, lies directly opposite the junction of High Street and George Street, where the additional storey would be far more visible within the town centre and within the historic terrace from this viewpoint. The proposed rearward projections would be inset from shared boundaries with neighbouring properties at 19 and 22. But the flank elevations would feature new windows. However, there are no residential properties immediately adjacent to the site, so there would not be any unacceptable impact as a result of overlooking, loss of privacy, etc. The site is located within the town centre. There is no parking proposed. However, that is not uncommon for town centre hotels. There are paid car parks in the surrounding area, and we have consulted the highways team who have raised no objections. So to summarise, there are no objections to the development and change of use in principle to a hotel. The proposals are considered to be acceptable with respect of access, parking and highways impacts. Flood risk and any impact upon neighbouring community could be mitigated by way of planning conditions were permission to be approved. However, the mass, height, scale, form, detailed design and use of materials of proposed development would result in an uncharacteristic and incongruous feature for the building and the surrounding area, which would appear wholly out of character and would be contrary to policies CSTP 22, CSTP 23 and PMD2 of the Thurrock Local Development Framework Core Strategy and Policies for Management of Development 2015. Thank you. And also happy to take any questions should you have them.
Thank you, Lottie, for your detailed report there. We have a statement of support on the proposal from the applicant, Mr. Hamid Islam. Thank you. Thank you, sir. You have 3 minutes to speak on your application. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair and Councillors. This application is purely for the additional third floor only. The ground, first and second floor and change of use have already been approved under planning application 25-00852-full. There has been no changes to the material, height, detailed design, mass and form of these 3 stories. Indeed, the 3 stories will be built as approved. The additional third floor or 4th story was added and an application submitted to make the scheme more financially viable, which will also bring more employment into the business and area and more tourism and visitors into the high street. As shown on drawing number 25143-111A, the additional third floor or 4th story is set back 6 meters from the frontage along the high street to ensure it cannot be seen from street level. The 6-meter deep flat roof in front of the third floor will not have any access for hotel guests. Although this application does increase mass and overall height, it does not affect the already planning approved change of use, the detailed design, form and proposed material. The additional floor will not have any adverse impact on the visual amenities of the building from the street level or affect the street scene beyond that of the already planning approved scheme. During the public consultation process, there were no objections received from consultees and no written objections from the members of the public. Please also note, third floor structures do already exist along the same terrace, particularly over Barclays Bank, number 9 High Street, Grays. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir, for your report. Do we have any questions from the committee? Yes, please, Jack.
Evening. A question on the, I understand this is the additional 4th floor or the 4th story. I'm just going to call it the 4th story. Could you describe the necessity for the building's financial health to have the 4th story? Essentially, why is this a requirement for the hotel to operate? Because I note you put that it makes it more financially viable. Is that the case then without this application that your previous one wouldn't follow through?
Yes, that's correct.
And was that considered at the point of submission of the previous application for the 3 stories?
No, that was considered after, and then after going through some calculations, obviously, and then we came to this conclusion that we need to increase the amount of rooms needed. Okay, thank you.
One last question. With the additional 4th story, how many additional rooms is that?
That's an additional of 9 more rooms. So originally it was 26, and now there's 35, so additionally 9 more rooms.
26, okay. Thank you.
Steve, do you have a question?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I did. Hi. I recall you from the last time you were here, and I recall at that time I was asking you about had you done a viability study in terms of the likely footfall, stroke usage, occupation rate, all of the things that I kind of thought you would have done. And at the time, the answer was no, you hadn't. So I'm guessing that you've taken that on board and realised that perhaps it wasn't very viable. Is that the case?
Yes, that's correct. So we must, after the approval of the previous planning application, we went and did an investment appraisal. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. And based upon that, we came to this conclusion that 9 more rooms would be viable for the financial stability of this hotel.
Thank you. Sorry. Thanks, Chair.
Yes, James.
So just to clarify, if this was to be rejected, the 4th story isn't approved, you wouldn't be able to open, it wouldn't be financially viable to do that?
As I've said in my speech, that the 3 stories will be built regardless whether it's being approved today or not.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair, is that just check?
Yep. Apologies. Sorry, my original question was, would that plan application initially be undertaken if this one was refused? And it still would be. Okay. And the existing 3 units that are there today, is that owned by yourselves or by the applicants?
2 of the units are owned by the applicant, and the middle, the pawnbroker, is obviously on a lease, but their lease is expiring within 2 months, and we've already served them the notice. So regardless of what decision, they've already been served the notice, and the 3-story will be built.
Okay, thank you.
You said you did a public consultation. How was that done, and actually how many people did you actually speak to?
The public consultation was on, like, you know, the one that you guys do through the Gov website, and where people have the chance to give their public comment.
So you haven't done an independent consultation?
No.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Does that mean that we'll lose 3 retail places in the high street? Sorry, I didn't quite get
You will only lose the middle shop. The 21 and 25 will remain the same.
Jack, you've got another question?
Apologies, there is one more. With regards to the proposal for the footfall that you had, what do you estimate that, unless it's inappropriate, you don't want to reveal that to me, what are you estimating the differences to be from the initial application to the future application? How big of a difference, essentially, is that for the commercial revenue, or sorry, the revenue, which essentially would be commercial revenue as a hotel, for yourselves and the high street?
It would be severely beneficial for the financial, but it would also be beneficial to the local employees that will be additionally employed, because as there will be more rooms, there will be more staff required to be able to maintain it.
Do you have an estimate of how many more staff you would employ?
I couldn't put a figure on it, but there would be maybe 2 to 3 more additional employees required.
Thank you.
Have any further questions of the applicant? If you could take a seat, thank you. Now, if we can ask questions of the planning officer, Lottie Raper. Jack.
Hi there. I have a question with regards to the drawing that you showed, the fourth story floor that they compared to the Barclays building, and you could see that the Barclays building was set further back. Of course, in the statement of support from the applicant, they're stating that this wouldn't be seen from the street level, and that there'll be 6 meters back from the high street. But the image I saw seemed to indicate that was going to be right at the front and almost prominent on the high street. So I just wanted to clarify which one that is.
Sure, let me just get those images back up. Oh, Carly, I don't have. There we go. Sorry, it's just reloading. Thank you. So this is the, it's arguably easier to see it on the floor plan than it is on the roof plan because the roof plan only shows the external walls. So this is the extent of the additional story that is being sought in the current application. This is the extent of the balustraded area, and this is the extent of the bit in front of the balustrade. So it would be much further forward than, for example, if this is High Street, it's set much further back. But the application, it's not, unfortunately, it's not on the screen because we've got to limit the number of images you see. The application was also supported by sections which do show that from directly at floor level, if you looked up, it would be limited. However, because it is opposite George Street, you've got such a long view to the site. This is what you would be able to see, which means any fourth floor would be incredibly visible from that approach.
Do you have an estimate of how far back it would need to go for it not to be visible?
I don't, I'm afraid.
Through you, Chair, if I may, I think it would have to be at least double the distance back than it's positioned at the moment, so it wouldn't be observed from George Street or from walking down the High Street. That would be my estimation, given how you can't quite see the additional story on the Barclay unit on the end, unless you're at particular viewpoints around the corner there, and that's set back. I'd say probably double the distance that the proposal is set back. That would be my estimation. But of course, this proposal is actually higher as a new story compared to just the plant room that's on the Barclays unit. I hope that's helpful.
Steve.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Lottie, as well. It was helpful. So you're going to have to remind me or help me because I'm struggling from the application that we approved earlier this year. So the lift shaft on that would be something similar to the plant room on the top of Barclays, height-wise. Yeah?
Yes, arguably.
So what we're now doing is saying that the application is to put another floor and that on there as well. Yeah, okay, yes, fine. Now I understand, thank you. I just wanted to be clear on that. So effectively what has already been approved would be the same kind of height if you went to the top of a lift shaft, the same as the plant room roughly on Barclays, yeah?
There may be a slight difference.
Yeah, but thereabouts.
Yes, akin.
That's great, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Do we have any more questions in the committee? Thank you. If we can go to debate, who would like to be the first?
It just seems to, looking at the section 16, it seems it's the...
Michael, can you pull your microphone towards you? Thank you.
Looking at section 16, your objections to it, seems to be like aesthetic. Is that the sole reason?
Yes, so we have a number of design policies that are intent on preserving the character and visual appearance of individual buildings, wider street scenes, and yes, it is largely that it would be harmful to that aspect.
Has the
Could there be some kind of compromise? Like, could they change the appearance of it? Would that help?
I think, as discussed, it would require setting back quite significantly to avoid that overarching increase in height in contrast to the rest of that row, which arguably might not be worth the cost, etc. The applicant didn't go through the formal pre-application advice process. They were, however, advised that it was unlikely that an additional storey would be recommended favourably. They could go through the formal pre-application advice to discuss amendments to the design if they were suitable.
I slightly struggle with this application personally. And the main reason is not really for the aesthetic requirements, but it's regeneration of the high street. And from what I can see from the 3 shops that we have, they seem fairly dated and undeveloped in a sense, that has the financial considerations for developing this hotel and with the additional 9 stories. Has there been any consideration, I guess, in the benefits to the high street from an economic perspective rather than just the appearance and the character?
So the investment appraisal that was mentioned in the statement was not submitted as part of the application. No financial information or business case has been provided for us to assess.
Yeah, fully agree. And I think that's, for me, what's missing from the application is if I could see the financial benefits, the footfall, and the value it adds to the high street, I think it would make a much more compelling case.
Do we have any further questions? Peggy.
It says here that parking isn't an issue, but there isn't any parking there. You know, disabled access, that could be a problem. Dropping people off and so on. I did read that. But surely a hotel that size should have its own parking.
Sorry, Councillor, you finished? Is that... Am I all right to come in? I don't want to talk over you. But I didn't want to talk over you and I realised I pressed the button before you may have been finished. The change of use has already been approved without any parking to a hotel for 26 bedrooms. The additional 9 bedrooms don't include any further accessible rooms, and the proposal as presented to you has been consulted upon by Highways, who have further iterated that they have no objections. It is not uncommon for town centre hotels to rely on paid car parks within the area. Potentially, Matt Ford may have more to say on the matter as it's his area of expertise.
Thank you, Chair. Members, with C1 hotels, the council's parking standards identify a maximum parking standard based on the location of the use. There is heavy weight reflected on town centre locations with good public transport links. The town centre of Grays has several pay and display car parks that can be used by people attending or turning up at the town centre. There are a number of car parks that are open 24 hours as well. This was identified in the previous application that it would be acceptable to agree a 0 parking standard specifically for the hotel because of the abundance of parking around the town centre that is in easy walking distance of the hotel. I take your points with regards to disabled access, but there would be physically no ability to provide disabled parking bays within a closer proximity than where the disabled parking bays are currently located within those car park facilities and on street. So on that basis, it was identified that it wouldn't be a severe reason to refuse the application in the last iteration, and with the extra 9 rooms, it wouldn't necessarily constitute an overarching issue.
Thank you, Matt. Any further questions? Jack.
Thanks, Chair. Can I ask a point of clarification from the officers at this point? Would it be appropriate or inappropriate to ask the applicant, as part of a deferral, to provide the economic benefits of, give them a chance to provide them economic benefits as part of the application? That seems to be what's missing in terms of the benefits they could provide for the extra 9 rooms. Or is that inappropriate at this stage of the planning application?
Okay, through you, Chair. So ultimately, this is a decision-making committee, so really we encourage the committee to make decisions, and making lots of deferrals is not good practice. So I would advise that, yes, you could do that if you wished, but ultimately they have had that opportunity already, that, you know, that they could have submitted that as part of their application. And if, subject to where members go, they're here, they will have heard the debate and the points raised, they could submit another application with that information as well. And that would be my sort of suggested route, really, to committee.
Thank you.
Any further debate? I'll move on to the recommendation. The recommendation from the officers is to refuse for the following reasons. The proposed development, by virtue of its mass, height, scale, form, detailed design materials, appearance of the proposed development, would result in an uncharacteristic and incongruous feature for the building and within the immediate surrounding area. The development would appear wholly out of character with the appearance of the street scene. Therefore, the proposal would be unacceptable and contrary to policies CSTP 22, CSTP 23, and PMD2 of the core strategy and policies for the management of development, as amended 2015, and the guidance set out in the National Planning Policy Framework, December 2024. The informative is the Town and Country Planning Development Management Procedure, England Order 2015 as amended, positive and proactive statement. The local planning authority has acted positively and proactively in determining this application by identifying matters of concern with the proposal and discussing with the applicant agent. However, the issues are so fundamental to the proposal that it has not been possible to negotiate a satisfactory way forward, and due to the harm which has not been clearly identified within the reasons, the refusal approval has not been possible. Do I have a proposer? Thank you, Steve. Do I have a seconder? Oh, Peggy. Can we please move to the vote? Those in favour, please raise your hands. Those in favour of the recommendation? And those against? The recommendation is approved. Moving on to item 10 of the agenda, Tilbury Community Hub, Civic Square, Tilbury Community Shop, Cafe and Hub. You can find these on pages 135 to 158 of your agenda. Can I please ask Nina Hicks to present the report? Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair. Good evening, members. Sorry, just trying to find the right slide. This application is for a change of use for a mixed-use building incorporating community facilities to provide a library, cafe and community pantry. The application relates to the Tilbury Library at Civic Square in Tilbury and number 15A, which is sited directly to the north of the library and is within the red line of the location plan before you. The application has been submitted on behalf of the Tilbury Towns Fund. The site hosts Tilbury Library and a former council office which is currently vacant. The proposal includes a change of use to enable the vacant office to be incorporated into the existing library building to provide a wider community provision. There are no in-principle objections to the change of use in relation to the council's core strategy. The west side of the site, let me just go back. Apologies. The west side of the site, to the west of the site is Tilbury Shopping Centre. To the east is Anchor Fields, where the Tilbury Family Hub is located at the ground floor of Centenary House in Brenham Road, and where the new Thurrock Youth Zone is currently under construction. The images shown here are to the front of the building. The left image looks northeast towards the nearby shopping parade, and the image on the right looks south towards Newton Road. This slide shows the north-facing elevation of the site. This is number 15A Civic Square, which forms part of the application site. The images shown here show the north of the site with Brennan Avenue in the distance, and the south side of the site with the adjoining Sunshine Centre in the background. The image here shows the pedestrian and vehicle access, which is at the rear of the site. This is the existing floor plan and the front elevation for the building as it currently stands. The proposed floor plan of the building is shown here, where the internal layouts are denoted. The change of use would provide a community cafe and pantry located on the left-hand side of the building. The library would continue to operate to the right-hand side, and other community desk spaces would be located more centrally, along with staff areas and office space also being provided. The proposed elevation indicates the changes to the exterior of the building, with the most prominent alteration being the installation of automatic double entrance doors, which are denoted in the top image in blue. The proposal follows the Purfleet pantry model, which has been successful in providing community services which would need to be scaled up for this project. The image here shows the indicative layout of the interior of the building, showing how this community provision might look. Here's some indicative images as well of how the inside of the building could look, along with these images as well. The proposal would incorporate a currently vacant unit, along with the additional service provided by Tilbury Library, to enable a community project where the library, community cafe and pantry can be accessed within one building. The development would be funded by Tilbury Towns Fund and is recommended for approval. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your detailed report there. Any questions from the committee? We should move on to debate. Steve.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks, Nina, for your description. Perhaps, fortunately, one of the briefer ones, but I'd already read through it. I think it looks to me like a very, very good use of the building and a great way of adapting it and making it more current. So I without question, will support this, this application. No shadow of a doubt about it. Thank you.
I too would like to reiterate what Councillor Taylor said. A great project, great for Tilbury, and I too shall support this. Peggy?
I think it's a brilliant idea and people in Tilbury need something like this.
I think that's something we're all agreed upon. So if I can move to recommendation, it's to approve subject to conditions. Thank you. If we can move to the vote, those that are in favour of the recommendation, please raise your hands. Thank you. Well, thank you, folks, for coming to what is our first committee meeting. It went quite well, I believe. And I'd just like to call the meeting to a close. And the time is now 21:11. Thank you.